Hello to everyone coming in. My name is Cassie, and I am going to be the moderator for us here today. We're going to start just a few minutes after the hour, so while you're waiting, check out our housekeeping items here on the screen, and also let us know in the chat where you're from and what your relationship to FRN is, and we'll be starting in just a few minutes. Hello again to those who are joining in. We're going to start in just about a minute, but check out our housekeeping items on the screen and let us know where you're from and your relationship to FRN. We'll get started here pretty soon. Great to see all the folks in the chat already. Alrighty, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Cassie, and I am the manager of stakeholder engagement here at FRN, and we are so excited to welcome you to FRN's first ever Roundtable Talks. In this session, we have invited our donors and funders and folks supporting the network, so we're very excited to talk with you today. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. This session is recorded. We cannot see or hear you, just so you know. We will be communicating with you throughout the chat function, so keep sending us chats of your thoughts and ideas, and we'll also be taking questions throughout the presentation here today, so you can toggle over to the question and answer function on the toolbar, and we will address those throughout the presentation and at the end. And we may ask you to unmute yourself if you wish to verbalize your question. Other than that, I will turn it over to Regina, and we're so excited to dive in.
Hi, everyone. I am so excited to have this time with all of you. This has been a long time coming. Today's conversation has been the culmination of a lot of work that FRN has been doing over the past decade. And within that decade, the last 5 years that I've been the executive director with the Food Recovery Network. And all of you on the call, our funders and our donors, are so critical to the work of Food Recovery Network. We wanted to share with all of you our framework. And I know many people, many of our funders have been part of earlier conversations as we were thinking about building this work. So just wanted to thank everyone for your time, for coming. I actually am going to be chiming in quite a bit as we go through the framework conversation, in the hopes that all of you have lots of questions that we can answer and ways to be involved and engage. But Katie Jones, our first ever Chief Operating Officer, will be walking us through the framework that we've developed. And there's a lot of exciting components to this. And I like to think about it in terms of FRN getting to our next mountaintop of work. And we're going to see a lot of things that probably will feel familiar to all of you as supporters of FRN, and some areas that we've been really concentrating on and have seen in our vision, and that day is finally here for us to really begin to merge some other kinds of work that Katie will walk us all through. So thanks so much for your time. As I said, I will definitely chime in. But before we get going with Katie, here on the screen, we do have some of the goals of our time together. And, again, there's a lot of things that all of you probably have certain proclivities toward, questions around. So we really want to make this your time to get those questions answered and to really see how, as a donor or as a funder, from your positionality, how we can really work together to move the needle on the work that FRN is engaged in. And so you're gonna, some keywords that you'll hear from me throughout the conversation are we really want to hear from you. We want to keep the relationship moving forward in a way that feels beneficial for how you know FRN as we, again, get to that next mountaintop. So with that, I will turn things over to the amazing Katie Jones, FRN's first ever Chief Operating Officer.
Hi all, it's lovely to be with you today. I have been at FRN for about 5 months now, but I've known of FRN's work for many years through Regina, and I'm just delighted to be part of the team and part of such important work. So I'm just gonna give a little context to the strategic framework that we're using. It is actually adapted from a framework called Results Count, which is from the Annie E. Casey Foundation out of Baltimore. And what the Annie E. Casey Foundation developed in their Results Count methodology is, clearly I was going to start and get choked up, a data-driven methodology for how to close racial and ethnic disparities in our work. So as we move forward in our work, the result in the using of this framework is really to solidify FRN's commitment to closing disparities in the communities that we are serving across the country. And part of how we do that in the strategic framework is articulating a result. And in this case, our result is recovering surplus food to feed everyone who is hungry in the United States. So people know FRN mitigates waste. We know that we recover surplus food, and the question we get a lot is to what end? And this result statement is meant to answer that question and also anchor how we work within our aligned system better to amplify our impact in the communities across the United States. So as I mentioned, it is a data-driven methodology. So the first step in using this is about how do you hold yourself accountable? What are the indicators to actually show that you are making a difference? And this is a brand new way of working for FRN in terms of how do we actually, help contribute to a broader movement and broader measurement of how FRN can contribute. So in this case, the 2 indicators that we're going to be tracking have to do with, the bedrock work that we've always done about recovering food, and we're specifically going to be tracking what is our contribution to reducing the amount of excess food in commercial and institutional settings, again, largely through our FRB program, as well as the college campuses that we are part of. And then the new indicator that we're going to be tracking is, again, what is FRN's role in contributing to the economic security of the number of people who are food insecure in the United States. Again, why are people hungry in the first place? And then how can FRN help actually address one of the key indicators that keeps that line so long, and in particular in these times, incredibly long. And we believe we can do this because we already have programs mitigating waste and recovering surplus food. And in terms of the economic security, one of the things that we learned as we went through past data and had conversations with past stakeholders is because of our students' involvement in FRN, they actually see their career trajectories differently, and they actually look to contribute differently to their workspaces. So FRN can now actually have a deliberate program around workforce development, and we can be targeted in our outreach so we can contribute to these larger factors. One thing I will say as context is FRN does not hold ourselves accountable alone to changing these things. We know it's going to take many actors, but that's the purpose of the results count framework, is by being intentional about the indicators that we're tracking, we can better identify which other organizations we should be working with. So we eventually create targets around these indicators. So this is brand new for FRN in terms of how we're going to hold ourselves accountable for the global impact of our work. So once we've identified the indicators and the factors, what are the strategies? So how is FRN actually going to double down, and how we can uniquely contribute to moving the data in a positive direction? And the first is, again, just continuing, strategy one is continuing our bedrock work. How do we continue to partner and engage students from across the country and communities across the country to mitigate waste and to recover surplus food? We know that it's going to look very different in the fall, and it could possibly look very different in many years following as we get to the other side of COVID. And we're excited to share with you some of the things that we've learned from our students currently, as well as some alumni that we've talked to and done these roundtable talks with. But the message for this slide is really the work that you have counted on FRN to do is going to continue, and continue very deliberately in service of our mission and our results. Strategy two is somewhat new, and it really is where you're going to start seeing a new way of FRN working, particularly rooted in our commitment to closing racial and ethnic disparities across the United States. One of the different ways that we're going to be working this year is actually having targeted outreach in the areas where we know, based on an EPA map, there is the most amount of excess food in the country, and overlay that with where we know there is the highest number of food insecure people in the country. And then thirdly, overlaying that with where do we have FRN chapters or FRB accounts, and how do we get more there if we don't have enough? And so, believe it or not, the growth that FRN has experienced over these last several years has been completely organic. And this year, what we're saying is we actually want to be very intentional about where we're going to have proactive outreach in the communities that demonstrate the most need, based on where we think we can bring our scalable model to help feed more people. The incentivized workforce development and job creation, this is one in particular that I'm really excited to talk to you all on the phone about, because we have some ideas about how we're going to be rolling this out. And this includes working with the partners who have already invested in FRN to get them in front of our student chapters to talk about the work that you all do to be sustainable businesses and your commitment to sustainable practices. And that's the first step, we think, in actually building out a very robust workforce development program. And I want to hear more from you all about, like, what's the need that you see here, particularly in terms of your talent pipeline, or particular messages you want to get out about your work. And it's the opportunity to really partner with us to build something from the ground up. And the third strategy here around amplifying voice is something that is completely new to FRN. And this really has to do with activating an advocacy voice. And one of the things that, again, we've learned through talking with students and alumni and other stakeholders is we know the systems are broken and the food supply chain is broken. And if we are looking for the type of solution at scale, then the way to do this is through advocacy. And specifically, how do we train our students to be organizers and identify legislation on the local, community, or state level, which could help mitigate waste at a large scale within their community. And this is one, again, that we're excited to tell you more, but spoiler alert, the students and alumni have been incredibly excited about how we can engage them in a particular way around advocacy and training them in advocacy work as we move forward. The last part about amplifying voice is around really trying to change the expectations and the amplifier effect that we know FRN has. So again, through the evaluations and stakeholder conversations that we've had, we know students are already having peer-to-peer engagement to say, hey, why did you take so much food? Maybe you could go back for seconds, don't just throw out that food, that sort of thing. And so part of our new way of working is actually wanting to say to people, if you join a chapter, the expectation is that you would actually talk to 8 to 10 more people about food justice issues or mitigating waste or this particular piece of legislation, because we know that we've had an unintentional amplifier effect. So this, tying back to tracking our impact more intentionally, we now actually want to put a stake in the ground and say, this is how much more of an amplifier effect we want to have in terms of how we activate the students differently. And the thing with strategy 3 that I really like is I really see it as FRN building a new type of currency. And in the sense of, what if we could actually activate 4,000 students to sign on to something or to talk about a particular issue? That has an incredible amount of resonance if you think of those 4,000 students talking to 10 other people. And so when you think about growth and when you think about visibility, I think that this is a very powerful lever that FRN has to work with as we move into this new way of working. So this is just a slide that really shows how we see the pieces fitting together. I can share that we did many versions of this slide because we really do see each of these strategies being mutually reinforcing. Again, so we can recover more surplus food to feed more people, and everyone actually who's hungry in the United States. So very much looking forward to your questions, your thoughts, your advice, in particular on everything, but also in particular around understanding the business needs you have and the needs that FRN fills for you and how FRN could do more to help you in your particular work. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Regina and Cassie.
Thank you, Katie. So to kick off the conversation, I did want folks to engage and please chat any thoughts or ideas you have based from what Katie just shared, especially how FRN can support the work that you're doing and how this weaves into your work. So let us know in the chat. But in the meantime, Katie, you mentioned a lot about conversations we've been having the last couple of days with our students and alumni. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that and what we've been hearing from the students and alumni that also may be related to what our funders and donors are looking to do in partnership with FRN.
So I will take that, and then Regina, please do add. So the headline that I already mentioned is that both the students and the alumni are very interested in the advocacy work and how they can be more intentional and deliberate about the advocacy that they're doing on behalf of these incredibly important issues. Given our current political climate, I'm not super surprised about that. But one of the questions that we had in particular was, what are we going to do if your college doesn't come back or doesn't come back in the way that you had anticipated? And one of the suggestions that we had, which, there was a lot of synergy because it came up both from our students and alumni, is just because dining halls aren't coming back in the same way doesn't mean there aren't restaurants and other venues open in the community where you could still recover food. And there's been a lot about gleaning in the news recently, and this is work that, again, FRN has already been doing. So how do we actually amplify the food recovery from different accounts in a community that aren't just exclusively in a dining hall, as well as how can we actually recover food from the farm, which again is something that FRN has done before, but now we can actually scale it in a way because we have far more people interested. So one of the things that we've been talking about is actually launching essentially a scholarship program or an incentive program where people could actually, both student chapters as well as alumni, could apply to do gleaning efforts in their communities so we can recover more food and we can feed more people, particularly as the demand is so high. So there was energy about both of those from both our students as well as our alumni. Regina, what would you add?
That was so well said, Katie. I mean, I really have to emphasize the fact that we have had so many conversations, the early adopter conversations that I was mentioning before, and many of you, you know, I've emailed you, I've texted with you, I've called you, and all of that has come into this framework. And I will say, you know, again, when I celebrate Katie coming on as our COO, really, Katie helped unlock me and unlock the board of directors to really consider, you know, why is FRN moving in the direction that we're moving into, and so hence this framework. So within that work, we actually heard a lot of very conflicting conversations from folks. And to be able to move that, you know, I want it to be Black, I want it to be white, to be able to move those kinds of conflicting ideas of what FRN means to various stakeholders was really difficult. And I think you'll see that represented here when we think about the bedrock work of FRN will continue. And that was so important to our students. And it's so important to our alums. And we heard that. But even from day one, when I first started at FRN, we knew that our students saw this bigger vision of the to what end piece, that we're really trying to pull out more. And so I heard a lot of celebration of that. Yes, it's very big, it's very bold, it's very audacious. And thinking about a decade ago, us saying to dining providers, you know what we're gonna do with all that extra food in the kitchen? We're gonna give it to people in need. That was bold and that was audacious back then. And so our students, even though they are not necessarily in school, that passion and that desire and that drive, 100% and then some, was still so present. And you know, yesterday we had our alumni conversation and they were all like, oh, we can't wait to re-engage with the students. How can I do some gleaning? And it was just so powerful and so wonderful. And you know, no one has said to us, this is too much, this is too big. And I think Katie really, you know, hit the mark on what can FRN be, what can we hold ourselves accountable to? Knowing that, you know, a big part of how we do our work is in collaboration and in partnership with others. And so we really want to stress that there are a lot of things that are in our control and a lot of things that are not in our control as we think about the food system and why there's surplus food, and, you know, the things that different community members can do to ensure that if there happens to be surplus, that it's going to the right place. The last thing that I'll add that, you know, we heard in these conversations is that we are scalable. We have definitely done that. We have grown tremendously. Right now we are, you know, actively at any one time 4,000 students. But as Katie mentioned, when those students, you know, that's what we have been able to measure. We know it's far bigger than that. And soon enough, you know, what we're able to measure will be 40,000 students. It'll just continue to grow. But what I wanted to say is with the students, right now, we are in very challenging times. And our students remain dedicated to working in challenging times. They've worked in floods, they've worked through wildfires, mass shootings. You know, right now we're also in a racial uprising. Our students have always done this work and they are ready. They might not necessarily be in school. And the thing about how our recovery program works is it is for the community. So we have all of these amazing students who can activate themselves when necessary. So we hear from folks, you know, oh, we don't have any extra food in our kitchen. Okay, great, let's celebrate that because that's almost impossible. That's amazing. You might not need us Tuesday, but you might need us on Wednesday because your event, it might rain. You know, there might be reasons why your event for 500 people, only 200 people show up. So even if you do all the best practices, so our students, you know, as we think about engaging them in other parts of the food system, they're ready. So now, you know, where we were recovering prepared surplus food, you know, they want to get into the farm fields, they want to get to know the farmers, They are really excited about solving problems around distribution. And so this workforce development area is so critical to what we're trying to do here. And it also is just tooling up activated citizens for when they are needed, and you might not be needed every day. And so that was another thing that, I heard echoed throughout the conversations that we've had.
That's wonderful. And I think one thing that I'll add that kind of Regina was just touching on is the job force development, and specifically in sustainable jobs. That was a big conversation we had with our alumni, specifically looking for more resources and more networking opportunities and things like that. And so that's something that I'm very excited for FRN to dive in deeper. On that subject, and with thinking about, Regina, you were talking about how we need to be in collaboration and partnership with other groups and other members within our network and stakeholders and such. What can our donors and funders expect to see from FRN, and what are we looking to do in partnership with them, and what are ways that they can get involved in this work with us?
Wonderful question. And, I have to say, again, just thinking about the folks that signed up for this Roundtable Talk, and the folks that actually happen to have an hour, where they could be live with us. So thank you so much for your actual time today. Those are conversations that I really want to continue to have. The priority areas for our funders, what compels a person to, become an individual donor for FRN. Again, we're all about those relationships. And so we want to make sure that you feel that your foundation, your corporation, or as an individual donor, you can see yourself in that work. And I know that that is so many different priority areas. For some of our funders, hearing, advocacy, that might feel new to you. And so we can definitely talk about that. For some other folks, you might say, well, it's about time, or we want to hear more about workforce development. I will say, in terms of the collaboration, so this is just an invitation for further conversation with folks, so that we really are getting to the root of what everyone individually is looking to do with FRN, because there's a lot here. I will say, in terms of collaboration and partnership, we will continue to do that because it is a road that is two ways. And so FRN wants to contribute the data and the information that we have, and we have done this so far. And that is, again, part of amplifying our voice. We have a decade's worth of data that is helpful to our partner organizations like ReFed, like the Natural Resources Defense Fund, that doesn't have a lot of information about what's happening on higher ed around food waste, food loss, food recovery. So, but on the other side of that, with funders, we do know from ReFed that thinking about food recovery, food waste, and food loss isn't necessarily on the hearts and the minds of a lot of funders. It is new, and for some of them, it feels like the bleeding edge of thinking about new concepts, like how does that, we are funders that, or maybe as an individual, I really care about the environment. What does food waste have to do with that? So, we're here to have those kinds of bridge conversations, knowing that a lot of the work for some continues to be very maverick. And for others, we've always been in that sphere of wanting to reduce food waste. And for other folks, the straddle for FRN is around who's getting that food. Why are people in places where they need consistently, they need surplus food? And we want to have those kinds of conversations as well. And so with our framework, we will continue to, as a cultural value of FRN, continue to collaborate, because this is how we're going to move that needle. Again, what Katie said about what can FRN do and what can we do when we unify with other research institutions, other nonprofits, the funders and the donors. And so when we think about the webinars, the piloting, the gleaning, everything that we will unveil, the new stuff that FRN is doing, as well as our bedrock work, all of that within that DNA is collaboration. And Katie, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to.
No, I think you said it all perfectly. I think I would particularly underscore just that the bedrock work that you have known and loved FRN will continue, as well as new work of us working in new ways. So I know Cassie has put some questions in the chat as part of being a roundtable, is also hearing from all of you. So, you know, we are very much of the opinion we want to make sure we're building something that you all find is useful, and that we are not, you know, shuttering something that you actually find incredibly valuable. So we really invite your questions, your dialogue, and, you know, helping build that understanding to make sure that, again, we're building something together that's of use to everyone.
You know, and to that point, I will just add this really quickly. FRN, when I first started, you know, 5 years ago, there was a lot of internal fixing that needed to happen because it was a brand new organization. It you know, started by entrepreneurs. And so there's a lot of you know, what I call the unsexy work that, you know, we did at FRN, and it was to stabilize this amazing concept. So there was a lot of growth that was happening, you know, all which ways. And so there was a bit of, well, let's, you know, think about what our processes are. How are we talking to students? You know, at what pace are we talking to students? You know, so there was a lot of internal work that we did. So we were able to strengthen the foundation of FRN so that we could, you know, jump off from that foundation and continue to grow. So we've done a lot of that work, and we are now at another inflection point of growth for FRN. And that's what this conversation is all about. And I have to say, you know, I have reached out to some of you individually about what examples can you provide to FRN around growth? When we think about Tom's shoes, when they were selling, you know, 2 pairs of shoes, and that meant 4 pairs of shoes that they were donating, what did that look like for them to now, you know, sell 4 million pairs of shoes? That's, you know, what growth can be activated in so many different ways. And I would just love to hear any bumps, bruises, ideas that folks have when you really think about expanding a nonprofit. We have our ideas, but I know a lot of you you've done it yourselves, or you have colleagues who have done it as well. So that's definitely something that we want to make sure that we are taking into consideration as we are expanding programming, as we are talking more pronouncedly about FRN's role in the recovery movement. So pronouncedly, maybe that's not a word, but I hope you know what I mean.
I caught it. Awesome. Yeah, I can definitely agree. And on that note of advice and wanting to hear from folks, definitely let us know what you're thinking, and we want to hear what drives you in this movement and to support our mission. So feel free to chat that or raise your hand, and we can unmute you and have a little bit deeper of a conversation. But in hearing and Katie and Regina talk a little bit more about this work, I imagine folks might have the question of why now? And especially given our situation being in the pandemic and a lot happening all around the world and in the US specifically, also thinking about our students and what that'll look like for them in the fall. Can you talk a little bit to why are we releasing this work now, and why is it that much more impactful?
Great. So I'll take the first part of that. And what I'll say is this was absolutely a conversation amongst our board. And one of the conversations that we had was, you know, as we realize we are going to be in this pandemic for some time, how do we build something better? Was the conversation that came up in the board. And that's not unique to FRN. You see that with other organizations and other sectors as well. But now seemed like the time, because we know it's going to be different on the other end. So how can we actually be intentional about what we're building on the other end so it's better. And continuing to recover food and mitigate waste, again, that will continue, but it's not going to be sufficient for the vision that we want to see of a just and equitable society on the other end. So this is our first contribution to how to make it look different and better on the other end.
I will add to that, my perspective, which is, we wanted to do this 7 years ago, 10 years ago. Come on. Why now? And it's just this beautiful thing of working with young people. I mean, they were there, and so I want to say another thing that I struggle with for FRN is, and I think a lot of people who run nonprofits, is incremental growth. And sometimes there's incremental growth because, and FRN has had incremental growth. It has taken me a very long time, working with the board and others, and of course, I don't fundraise alone, but to get to a place where we had a budget that we could make these key investments. I will say, and I've said this to our team, it's baked into our strategic plan, the health and capacity of our staff. I will say, it's taken a long time, but I bake this in that I want to be able to provide more salaries for our staff, higher salaries, more competitive salaries, being able to do that, and then continue to expand to a place where I felt safe enough that the funding was going to be there to meet the needs of the salaries that I had. It took a little while. And so you'll see in our 990s, had the pandemic not hit FRN, we would have been a $1 million organization. And when I first started FRN, our budget was $425,000 and things weren't looking great. And so why now is, it's been years of saving. It's been years of all of you getting to know me and getting to know the work of FRN and challenging me to push more. So yes, the board definitely wanted to see that happen, but a lot of you did as well. I had two really important conversations with some of our long-term funders where I was talking about hiring a director of programming. And one person in particular said, Regina, why a director? And she said, I know why, because that's where your salary is. That's what you can afford basically, but you need more than that. And I said, don't you know? And so why now is also a combination of being very conservative about how we can grow and maintain that growth in a way that will ensure we're not going to shutter when things get tough. And COVID has 1,000% presented a very tough situation where I will say we were about to embark on our first ever major program evaluation for our work. This is part of, the framework to understand our data and, the DNA of FRN in a way that we just have never been able to make that kind of investment before. We're talking, PhD of evaluation level work, and then COVID hit and we realized that we needed to, we couldn't make that investment in good faith because we needed to keep our team, we needed to make sure that they were getting their salaries. So I'm proud that we're weathering it, just like, trying our hardest like everyone else. But so that's another reason of, the why now. I feel like I wish I could have done this a long time ago. And one other last thing I'll say to the why now is, things have changed so dramatically in the last few years that I've been in the food recovery space. There are more apps that have come up. There are more, organizations that have come up all around this work, and that is great. That's what we need. We need more organizations and more people dedicated to this work. But that also means that the landscape changes all of the time. And so our why now is a commitment to focusing in on, as Katie mentioned, this disaggregated data to really help us figure out where can we be the most, where can we make the most improvements, and use that information as we think about, other disaggregated data. There are hungry people all over the country. There's surplus food all over the country. And so to really begin to move the needle in the way that we know that we can, to really scale this, to really blow this out of the water, we knew that now is the moment. There's a lot of key pieces, Katie joining the team being one of them, Cassie getting a title change and refocus of her work is another thing that has really helped us to hone in. And that's also something the board said too. You guys are way too wide.
That's wonderful. Thank you both for that answer. And thinking about that and the ways that FRN is changing and moving forward, I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I was wondering if you could hone in on what should our funders and our donors expect to see immediately from FRN, especially thinking as we're moving to the fall and really getting this year started with our student chapters and network.
Regina, did you want to take that one first?
Awesome, definitely. I thought you were going to take that one. we had other conversations. People have asked that same question, and so normally Katie take the first, but I would definitely love to take that. So in the fall, we will launch several pilots that we are currently working on around the advocacy work that Katie, that Katie mentioned. Gleaning is a big piece of the work that you'll see in the fall. We want to strengthen more the peer-to-peer work that I'd mentioned before. We have all of these really excited and amazing alums who are literally all across the country engaged in all kinds of amazing work. Some of them are still in the sustainability space, the food waste mitigation space, but some of them are working at newspapers. They're architects, they're going into med school, they're lawyers, and they are still just as committed to this work. So making sure that we are activating our very vast alumni network into the work that the students are doing, because we want to make sure that, again, if students aren't necessarily recovering food, that they are prepped up and ready to do that, that they are able to do that even if they're not necessarily attending school on campus. They might still be doing work online. I just heard from an alum not too long ago, and she started recovering food at a meal site in her community because she was like, oh, I can do this. I have been trained to handle food safely. So our students can do the same thing. If they're not taking classes on their college campus, if they're living with mom and dad, or they're in their apartments with their friends, they can still recover food and keep that work going and channel that work into the larger work of FRN. So those are some of the things that you'll see in the fall. And then, from the perspective of our amazing donors and our amazing funders, I want to continue the conversations that we'll have. That will we want to build in a closer feedback loop, and that means giving information to all of you to react to. Definitely come on some gleanings in your communities, if that's something that you'd like to do too, because if you as a funder, maybe if you never have recovered food or gone on a gleaning, it just really puts things in perspective as to what we're doing and why we're doing it. So those are some of the things in the fall, but Katie, I will turn it to you to fill in.
Sure. The only other thing I would add to that is, as many of you know, we also have an FRV program, that's Food Recovery Verified, and that's where we actually partner with businesses to help them mitigate waste and then also contribute surplus food to their partner agencies and people in their community. And that's actually been an area where we've seen tremendous demands, particularly in COVID. So even though students weren't necessarily on chapters, we still had those FRV accounts reaching out to us to say, I still have the food, and how else can I get it to people who need it since this event has been canceled, or this convention center has been shut down, and that sort of thing. So immediately we are also working on how to expand and pilot within our FRV business model so we can generate earned income as well.
Great. Thank you, Katie and Regina. I wanted to open it up to our audience now. If you have any comments or questions, you can chat them or raise your hand with the little raise hand button, and we will unmute you to have the conversation. And I'm specifically interested to hear what folks are thinking around that feedback loop that Regina mentioned, and what are things that you want to get involved with and that you're interested to learn more from FRN. So I'll wait just a moment or so folks can chat in their responses and raise their hand so we can have the conversation with you.
And while people are thinking about the questions they have, and please don't be shy, you know, and you can always, you know, reach out to me, to Katie, to Cassie, email. For those of you who know me, you can always text me or just call my cell phone. But one of the things I wanted to just talk on really quickly that Katie mentioned, and Cassie's worked on Food Recovery Verified for a very long time now, is we have some really amazing partners in our Food Recovery Verified program. We were the official recovery partner for the James Beard Foundation. We did a recovery effort all across the country for this really great nonprofit called Operation Barbecue that establishes situations for people to come and have a meal with the families of men and women service people, because a lot of us don't have contact with people who are in the military. And so we were the recovery efforts for that event. You know, Twitter, Starbucks headquarters, we have a lot of really great names that care, that want to have a recovery program and want, you know, to do that in partnership with FRN. And we know that we can do a lot more with Food Recovery Verified. And so this is an area of growth that could go in a lot of different directions, might need a lot of monetary support to get to the next level. As you know, Katie said, this is a revenue generator for Food Recovery Network, but it's also this awesome way to propel our work outside of higher education. And so if any of you have an interest in that kind of growth, that kind of earned revenue growth model, we would definitely love to talk with you, to see what resources are out there for us. You know, I think about a lot of things with FRV, but one of the things that come to my mind, and maybe Cassie and Katie have other terms within their models for FRV, but is new business development. And so that's just like a whole other area that, you know, we'd love support, guidance, thoughts on.
Great. And then I see in the chat here, Erica mentions that they're from a small food waste company in Atlanta and would love to hear if there are any accelerator programs specifically. And Erica also mentioned being interested, it sounded like, in the earned revenue growth model that you mentioned, Regina. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to just our work that we're looking to do in Atlanta and specifically accelerator programs that Erica mentioned. And Erica, I can also unmute you so you can kind of help explain your question more specifically around the accelerator program. So I'll unmute you now. Alrighty, Erica, we should be able to hear you. I hope I captured your question well, but let us know what you were thinking.
Thank you so much. Yes, you did. So I was, you know how sometimes you can go into a deep hole with food rescue and gleaning and food waste and all of that. And I fell into one of those deep holes, and like the rabbit hole, I call it. And I saw somewhere, I don't know if it was REFED, where they had an accelerated program or accelerator program for like food waste companies and, you know, the various different states where you can maybe learn different things along the food waste, ecosystem and whatnot. And I was wondering if maybe you provided something like that or knew of something like that, because as a small company, like I'm relatively new in it, and I want to, take it to, another level, but I feel like there's so much more that I need to know. And so I was like, maybe with an accelerator specifically targeting food waste, food rescue, food recovery, cleaning, and all of that I can learn even more specifically about what I'm doing, and not just a general like a business accelerator, nonprofit accelerator, but specifically geared towards food waste, or if not that, maybe an area of where I can maybe, I don't know, mentorship or something specifically for people who know exactly what I'm talking about,
Excellent. So, Erica, that's awesome. Congrats on your business. It sounds like it's new, so that's really exciting. And I will say, oh yeah, I think you might have seen the reaction of the three of us of falling down that food recovery rabbit hole. Oh yes. Yeah. And actually, I have to remind our students all the time, that they think about food waste, food recovery, food loss every single day. And while it has come onto the American consciousness, the National Restaurant Association has a survey where for the first time they've been giving the survey out for decades, that food waste was an issue that patrons wanted to see addressed. So it's definitely more and more on the minds of people in America, but not as much as we'd like, and that's why we're all here. So you're absolutely right. ReFed, the ReFed, that group, they are wonderful. And I would say they are a plethora of really awesome resources. So other players in the space, they definitely talk about it. Food Tank is, I think, another organization that drops a lot of names.
And you said Food Tank?
Food Tank.
Okay.
We love them. And I would say, in terms of FRN, Cassie is definitely the person that, to talk with about, ideas around collaboration. We have those calls all the time because, again, collaboration is so key and important to us. Now, we're a nonprofit, and so what collaboration looks like with a nonprofit among, for-profits or between nonprofits is, it might look a little bit different than what you're thinking of, but we always want to have those conversations, throw the ideas against the wall, and see what sticks. I would also say the Natural Resources Defense Fund that I just mentioned, they also have a lot of studies that they put out where they talk a lot about different players in this space. In the for-profit world, especially around food waste, there's a conference called Waste Expo that's happening virtually.
Is it happening virtually?
It is.
Is it this year? Because I know that I signed up. It was going to be in August, and it changed to October.
Yeah, I know that. Thank you, COVID, for yeah. So now it's going to be virtual, okay. And so a great way to get to know more people in this space. And then the Food Policy Conference is happening. That's also virtual. And then in terms of mentorship, that's a great question. I think it's, I don't know if you are in touch with Waste Management or Cassie, remember dumpsters.com? We really love them a lot. They're a small startup headquartered in Ohio where, their whole concept is, we want to be your waste haulers, but how about we actually not put organics in what we're hauling away for you? How about we educate our clients on what they can do with their foodstuffs? So the first thing they should do is, if they're surplus, talk to FRN, and then if there's organics, there's other things. So I thought that was very avant-garde for a waste hauling company to think in that regard. How about we have less things that we're going to take from our customers? It's awesome. But I would open that up to Katie or Cassie in terms of mentoring, as opposed to reaching out to companies that you like the person and think you could learn from them.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm actually not sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Erica, I'd be happy to connect with you after one-on-one Yeah, especially because we've been thinking a lot about Atlanta specifically, so it's great to hear that that's where you're based. As kind of what Katie was mentioning before, something that overlaps a lot of different things, where overlapping high food waste, overlapping high food insecurity, and then also overlapping some of our FRN chapters down there. We actually had planned to do a regional summit in the Atlanta area this past spring, but of course that went virtual given COVID. But really looking to expand our work there specifically, and just seeing, also connecting to Regina's thoughts about and how she shared earlier about the earned revenue model. And so I'd love to connect with you further one-on-one after this, just to share some of our thoughts and ideas and see if there's opportunity for partnership there. So thanks so much for raising that comment and question.
Yes, thank you. What was the name of the summit? Because I just forgot it. It was on the tip of my tongue. The one that was supposed to be in August, then they changed it to October, but then she said it was virtual.
The Waste Expo.
The Waste Expo, that's right.
Yeah, and I can send that link in our chat shortly too.
Okay.
Amazing. Thank you, Erica. Were there other questions you have? Yeah. Awesome. Great. Well, if no other folks have any questions or comments, I wanted to pass it over to Katie to our next steps after this conversation.
Sure. So thank you so much for being here today. In terms of next steps, we'd love to talk with you individually about, again, what advice you have for us, what gives you pause, what makes you excited, so we can, better collaborate as we move forward. We will send you a recording of this webinar, and we ask again, we're trying to test out this amplifier effect. So please go ahead and send it to 8 to 10 other people who you think might be interested. And the last thing I would say is that we do plan to be in a public learning stance as we move forward and venture forward with this work. So you'll see the best way to contact us. We'll be doing more blogs. One that's forthcoming is Regina talking about what it's like to lead a nonprofit during COVID as a woman of color. And so really helping to be publicly learning with you all and in service of you all. So Regina, any closing thoughts?
I loved what you said about, this is a public learning stance that we're taking. It's so true. And not a lot of organizations do that. And so we're being bold. We're asking for help. We know we're really good at a lot of things. We've made a lot of accomplishments, but we're with the mindset that, again, this is something that we can only make better with the help of many. There's so many thousands of amazing people in this movement, and together, I know that when we do get on the other side of this, we're going to have a stronger food system that's dynamic and can really be more reactive to climate, to pandemics, to feeding people in need, among other things too. I know we all have so many stories about food and what it means to us. And so I hope that everyone appreciates, the transparency with how we're trying to grow FRN. I'm really proud of what we've been able to do thus far. And in closing, I would just say, we've been able to accomplish what we've done thus far because of all of your support. It really means so much to us. And I know that you probably hear that a lot, in your lives and in your roles as individual donors or as funders, but we really are stewards of every single dollar that you are able to contribute to FRN. We try to make, if we get $1, we try to, make that into $5 worth of effort. And so I just really want everyone to know that we take your support very seriously. And you've helped us to get this far. And we really look forward to continuing the journey with all of you as we, get up to that next mountaintop and see the horizon from there. So thank you all so much.
Great. Thank you to everyone who's been able to join us today. We really appreciate your time and your energy. Thank you to Katie and Regina for all of your thoughts and conversation that you have provided here. As Regina mentioned, and as we mentioned, we'll be sending a recording after this, so please share it with any of your colleagues and friends, and we'll be in touch with you again soon. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.
Thanks, Cassie, for moderating.
Bye.